At my daughter's wedding, they tried to hide me behind a mountain of flowers, like I was a family secret best forgotten. 3 days later, my charming new son-in-law showed up at my door with papers that could have stolen everything. That's when he discovered he'd chosen the wrong widow to underestimate. And before I dive into how one wedding turned into a war over millions, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Not So Perfect Family 365, where real family drama comes alive in every story. They sat me at table 12, behind a floral arrangement tall enough to hide a small airplane. Hibiscus and baby's breath climbed like a hedge between me and the life I paid for, a living wall that said, "Please, pretend the mother of the bride doesn't exist." I caught my reflection in the ballroom mirror, silver hair, modest navy dress, pearls that once belonged to my mother, and let the insult settle where old aches live. In another lifetime, Jonathan would have squeezed my hand under the table and said, "Let them underestimate you, Ellie. It keeps your powder dry." The Mercers arrived with the weather system they always brought: diamond glare, cologne heavy as fog, the hush that follows money. Victoria Mercer led the formation, all cheekbones and chilled champagne, dispensing air kisses like tax receipts. "Eleanor," she said, landing at my shoulder, eyes skating over the flowers rather than around them. "So lovely you could make it." Translation: so lovely you could be managed. "I live 10 minutes away, Victoria," I said, smiling. "If I'd gotten lost between here and my driveway, we'd have larger problems than seating charts." Her smile didn't move. "Of course. Well, enjoy the view." The view from behind my hedge was mostly stems, but the mirror across the room gave me the whole pageant. Ava in lace that once belonged to her great-grandmother, gliding as if the floor were a secret she'd been told first. Bridesmaids like moving pastel. The groom in a suit so well cut it made you forgive his posture. Daniel Mercer worked the room like he'd bought it wholesale. He had 3 smiles. One for the moneyed, warm enough to thaw permafrost. One for the useful, conservative, and precise. And one for everyone else. A pleasant mask that said, "I'm listening but not investing." I watched him wear each, switching like gears, and remembered the first time he'd shaken my hand, firm, controlled, with the faintest suggestion that the hand belonged to a man who solved problems. "Mom!" Ava materialized at the edge of my hedge like an anxious angel. A smear of lipstick lived on her wrist, a hairpin clung to her veil like a barnacle. "Sweetheart," I said, standing to meet her. "You're a miracle." Her eyes shone and then flicked to the flowers. "Okay, don't be mad," she said in a rush. "The planner said the centerpiece scale matters on the periphery for the photos, and Dan's mom wanted you near the back so the aisle shots aren't crowded and so the photographer can see the Mercer brand unblemished by my cardigan. I understand." "It's not that," she said, actually blushing. "It's just optics for the story." There it was. The way she said story now mattered more than the truth. Since meeting the Mercers, my daughter had started curating her life like a museum exhibit. Lighting, captions, velvet ropes around anything messy. "I'll be where you need me," I said and kissed her cheek. "Go get married." "I love you," she breathed, already scanning the horizon for flames to put out. "And please, can you maybe keep the brooch off for the photos? Victoria says it reads vintage." "It is vintage," I said dryly. "That's what things become when they refuse to die." Her laugh was quick, grateful, and then she was gone. The ceremony was a ribbon pulled cleanly from a box. Vows so perfect they sounded tested on strangers, a string quartet that knew exactly how to be heard and not remembered. When the I do's gave way to applause, I clapped like the mother of a girl who had survived the shoals of adolescence and found harbor. When they kissed, I saw the child who used to fall asleep on my chest with one fist tangled in my sweater. Weddings compress time, grief and joy stack like plates, and you hold them both, careful not to drop the edge. Cocktail hour swarmed. Daniel approached at last, smile set to warm as if he'd saved this wattage for me. "Mrs. Brooks," he said, bending close enough that I smelled the oak of his cologne. "You look radiant." "An excellent trick of the lighting," I said. "Congratulations, you both made something beautiful today." "Thank you." He touched my elbow, guiding me a step away from the hedge. The touch was gentle, proprietary, practiced. "I was hoping we could plan some time together, just us. I want to make sure you feel supported. Ava worries about you in that big house." "Does she?" I kept my face pleasant. "I've been surviving my own company for 68 years. We're old friends, my solitude and I." He laughed, tasting for how much acid lived in my sugar. "Of course. Still, transitions can be complicated. There are ways to make everything easier. My firm specializes in family continuity and financial security. Little guardrails for peace of mind." "Guardrails," I repeated, because nothing says freedom like a nice set of rails. His smile didn't falter, but something behind it adjusted, the tiniest recalibration. "Just think about dinner. Thursday, quiet place, no pressure. We can talk through options so you never have to worry about bills or contractors or opportunists. Ah, I said, those opportunists. They circle good people, he said earnestly. I see it all the time. I nodded as if the world had just taught me something new. Thursday works, I said. I'll wear my most gullible expression. He grinned at that, though it flickered like a man deciding whether I was joking or confessing. Wonderful, I'll send the details. He drifted toward a cluster of donors, no guests. In this family the nouns blurred, and I watched him shift smiles like a dealer riffling cards. In the mirror I could see Victoria study me without turning her head, the way a cat watches a gap under a door. I lifted my glass. Her gaze slid away, already past me to the next problem. Eleanor, the planner, a woman of firm hair and fragile nerves, flapped toward me. We need you for the family photos by the fireplace. If we can get you quickly, that would be efficient, I supplied. Yes, she beamed, grateful to be understood in any language. The fireplace was a stage dressed for Emerald City, fern, stone, the chandelier above like a galaxy. We arranged as instructed, blood ties closer to the flame, money on the axis. Victoria claimed the center like a birthright and patted the cushion beside her for Ava. Dan, chin down. Ava, shoulders, darling, lengthen your neck. She looked at me finally, her version of kind. Eleanor, maybe a step back, you'll still be perfectly visible. Like the conscience, I said, always present, rarely foregrounded. Click, click. The photographer captured us smiling, breathing, inhabiting the fiction that families make when cameras are near. After the first dance, after speeches polished enough to pass for sincerity, after the cake that tasted like a memory of sugar, I slipped out to the hallway and found a strip of quiet. The hotel carpet went on in a thoughtful pattern. I set my hand on the cool of the wall and let my shoulders drop. Jonathan had hated these rooms. Too airless, he'd say, too bright with the wrong kind of light. What do you want, Ellie? He used to ask when the world pressed in. What's the move that gives you back yourself? Before I could answer the ghost, Ava materialized again, shoes in her hands. They pinch, she said, breathless. Mom, are you okay? You vanished. I wandered, I said, it's a habit. She bit her lip, torn between the ceremony and the woman who made her. Promise me you'll be nice to Victoria. She's intense, but she's important to Dan and to us now. I promise not to bite unless bitten first. Thank you. She exhaled, then added, without looking at me. And Dan's going to help with the house stuff. He knows a guy for everything. It'll be good. You've carried so much since Dad. There was a softness in that last word, something like apology. Go dance, Ava, I said, and pressed her shoes back into her hands. Let someone else carry you a while. When I returned to table 12, my floral hedge waited faithfully, a moat around a keep. The Hendersons, old colleagues of Jonathan's, had taken my earlier absence as invitation to speculate. A terrible time to manage a property alone, Mr. Henderson was saying, his bow tie wilting. We hired a firm after Margot's fall, worth every penny. Independence is expensive, Mrs. Henderson nodded, but so is disaster. They smiled at me benevolent, I smiled back benign. So is bad advice, I said cheerfully, and took a sip of water that tasted faintly of lemons and stainless steel. When the bouquet flew and applause lifted, when the DJ pivoted from strings to something with a backbone, the night loosened. Young men unfastened their collars. Old ones told better jokes than they remembered. Daniel found me again near the end, sleeves rolled in a way that said effortless and cost a mirror. Thursday's set, he said, tone pitched for intimacy over noise. Very private place. We can talk openly. Splendid, I said. Openness is my favorite flavor of secrecy. He laughed, touched my elbow once more, and vanished into a halo of groomsmen. Outside, Seattle misted as if the sky were fine-grading rain over the city. I stood under the awning while the valet jogged into weather. The air smelled like wet stone and second chances. My phone buzzed in my clutch. I expected Ava. Where did you go? I expected the planner. One more photo. I did not expect a blocked number and a text that read, don't sign anything. A friend. Thursday arrived with the kind of weather Seattle does best, gray with a faint drizzle, like the city was rinsing itself in secrets. I stood in front of my mirror wearing the safe widow uniform, charcoal dress, discreet pearls, hair swept back as if I'd been invited to a book club, not a chess match. Jonathan's voice lived somewhere in my ribs. Always let them think you're the pawn until you've lined up the queen. The restaurant Daniel had chosen announced itself with frosted glass and French vowels. The kind of place where water was described by region and menus had no prices, just delicate italics. He was already there, rising with a practiced burst of enthusiasm, the way a man rises to greet an investor with deep pockets. Mrs. Brooks. He kissed the air near my cheek. You look stunning. I brushed imaginary lint from my sleeve. How thoughtful of you to notice survival looks good on me. He chuckled, practiced, expensive. Please sit. I've taken the liberty of ordering a bottle, something exceptional. The waiter presented it like a holy relic. Daniel swirled, sniffed, tasted, nodded with reverence. Perfection, he declared, sliding the glass toward me. I lifted it, let the scent brush my nose, then set it down untouched. So, Daniel, you wanted to discuss guardrails. He smiled, the warm one that promised rescue. Yes, I know Ava worries about you. A large house, finances, decisions, it can get overwhelming. I assure you, the electric bill and I are on intimate terms. We've been negotiating for years. He leaned in, lowering his voice to the tone men use when explaining serious matters to women. I'd never forgive myself if something happened and you weren't protected. That's why I brought a little something. With the flourish of a magician, he slid a manila folder across the table. I opened it, expecting maybe financial brochures. Instead, power of attorney, medical authority, full financial oversight. In other words, the keys to the kingdom dressed up as kindness. My laugh was soft, but it had edges. My, such comprehensive concern. Tell me, did Ava help you draft this, or was this your solo masterpiece? She thinks it's brilliant. He didn't flinch. We both just want you safe. Safe from what exactly? He sipped wine. Dishonest contractors, greedy relatives, unethical advisors. You'd be shocked how people circle a vulnerable widow. Like you, I thought. Aloud I said, how prescient, and you recommend I sign tonight? The sooner the better. These arrangements, well, they work best before questions of competency ever arise. Competency. The word sat between us like a loaded gun. I closed the folder gently, laid my hands over it as if blessing a coffin. I'll want my attorney to review this. Silly, I know, but old habits die hard. His smile flickered, quick as a candle in draft. Of course. Though sometimes lawyers complicate simple things. Why not just finalize now for everyone's peace of mind? Because peace of mind isn't peace if it's forced. Before he could press further, my phone buzzed in my clutch. A text from Ava. Mom, please be open-minded. Dan only wants to help. Don't embarrass him. Embarrass him. The words stung sharper than they should have. My daughter, once the girl who thought I hung the moon, now policing my tone for the benefit of a man she'd known barely 3 years. I set my glass down carefully. I'll think about it, Daniel, truly. He exhaled as if I'd signed a treaty. Wonderful, I knew you'd see reason. How about I stop by this weekend with my notary? We can tie everything up neatly. Your notary? I tilted my head. You do come prepared. His eyes narrowed, just for a beat, the mask slipping, suspicion darting across. Well, one can never be too organized. The waiter reappeared with dessert menus. I waved mine away. Daniel ordered something with syllables longer than my patience. He launched into anecdotes about helping other families, smoothing transitions, preventing disaster. I smiled sweetly and imagined every one of them realizing too late what the help had cost. When the check arrived, he signed with a flourish, making sure I saw the platinum card. His eyes glittered with triumph as though the matter were settled. Thursday dinners may become our tradition, he said. Family collaboration is everything. Collaboration, I echoed. Such a generous word for control. He laughed, missing the acid. I'll be in touch. Outside, the drizzle had turned to proper rain, needling down in silver lines. I walked under it without raising my umbrella, letting the cold sting my cheeks awake. The manila folder sat heavy in my bag, like a snake I hadn't killed yet. When I reached my car, another message pinged. Same blocked number as before. He's faster than I thought. Don't let him corner you, a friend. I gripped the wheel, heart thudding. Daniel wanted my signature. Someone else wanted me warned. And somewhere between them, I was about to decide whose game I was really playing. The text from the blocked number sat on my screen like a match head. Don't sign anything. A friend. I stared at it long enough for the words to glow after I closed my eyes. There are 2 kinds of warnings in life, the ones you're grateful to ignore and the ones that climb the stairs with you. I flipped on the kitchen light. The house answered with the familiar hum of an old companion, the refrigerator's low sermon, the click of settling wood, the rain pattering against windows as if the night had been wrapped in paper. I set my purse down, pulled the manila folder free, and left it face down on the counter the way you leave a snake in a glass box. Visible, contained, still too close. Jonathan used to call my attention a flashlight with fresh batteries. Point it where the shadows are thickest, he'd say, tapping the edge of his newspaper. I pointed it downstairs. The basement still smelled like the cologne he pretended not to wear. Old leather, pencil shavings, coffee that had gone cold and been forgiven. I clicked on the chain light and followed the thread of a memory through dust motes. Jonathan whistling, sleeves rolled, tools lined like a choir. He'd built this room to be a refuge from other men's noise. It had become a museum of his quiet. The desk sat where I'd left it after the funeral, untouched, as if any disturbance might collapse something invisible. A cracked coaster, a crossword with 3 clues blank, a jar of screws too carefully sorted to be domestic. On the back wall, a strip of exposed concrete had always seemed uglier than its neighbors, a patch that stubbornly refused paint. I moved closer. The edges were too clean, the surface too smooth. My fingers found a seam, the way your tongue finds a notch in a tooth. I pressed. Something gave, not much, but enough. A small panel clicked, then pivoted on a hidden hinge. Behind it, a square door lived in the wall, matte and stubborn, the color of old safes and older secrets. Jonathan, I breathed, not sure if it was gratitude or complaint. The key, his father's, heavy as a promise, had hung on a nail behind the water heater for 4 decades, masquerading as nostalgia. I slid it in, turned. The mechanism protested like a back getting out of a chair, then relented. The door swung open. Inside, documents nested in envelopes, a black ledger with corners worn shiny, a bundle of certified letters bound by twine, and on top, a thick envelope with my name in Jonathan's precise, unshowy hand. Aliner, I sat in his chair, the one that still remembered his weight, and slit the envelope with a fingernail. His voice rose as clean as if he stood in the doorway, saying, "Ellie, sit down," with that soft authority that made panic incompatible with oxygen. My Aliner, the letter began. If you're reading this, someone has finally done what I knew they would. Suggested you are safest inside a cage painted like a cradle. I'm sorry. I would have spared you the insult if I could. My throat tightened. The paper smelled like the drawer it had slept in, dust, cedar, the idea of patience. I should have told you everything. I did not, because hiding tools keeps thieves from breaking in to find them. Please forgive the secrecy. It was for you, not against you. Here are the facts. Over our 42 years, I put aside more than you suspected. Some investments did what the world promised. Others did what I promised them. What exists now, after taxes, after charity, after errors, is $29.5 million held in an irrevocable trust. You are the beneficiary and the sole protector. No power of attorney can touch it. No court can be convinced to pry it open. It is not a gift, it is a shield I leave in your hands. I exhaled a sound that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. Relief and anger make a strange couple. I read on. You will be approached by people who use the language of kindness to ask for custody of your life. They will come wearing family and good intentions. They will insist the rails they offer are scenic. Smile, nod, call Mara Patel. Her card is enclosed. She understands what this letter means. I prepaid for her attention. Use it without apology. Do not be shamed into surrender. Do not be hurried. Your mind is as sharp as it has always been, is sharper than most men's at their best. Let them underestimate you. It keeps your powder dry. If I have one regret, it is that I leave you with a war instead of a garden. But you, my love, have always known how to plant things where others only saw dirt. Jay, the paper blurred. I lowered it and sat very still, the way you sit when the ground shifts and you're waiting to see what kind of land you've been moved to. 29.5 million. The number didn't land like greed. It landed like a commandment. Protect yourself. Protect what protects you. Under the letter lay a white business card, thick stock, black type, no flourish. Mara Patel, Elder Law and Trusts. Direct line, asterisk, asterisk, asterisk. On a sticky note in Jonathan's handwriting, ask about the failsafe. She'll explain it better than I can. There were bank statements, dense with small deposits that added up to stealth. A notarized trust instrument with paragraphs like battlements. A list in Mara's handwriting of signs of undue influence, as if she'd written a weather report for a storm that hadn't yet rolled in. Urgency. Isolation. Confidentiality. It's for your own good. Check, 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 and check. Phone vibrated, startling me so badly I almost laughed. The screen lit with Nora. I hadn't heard from her in months. Nora, Ellie. Her voice was too bright, a match struck too close to the paper. God, I've been meaning to call. You look beautiful on Ava's Instagram. That lace was at your mother's. My grandmother's, I said carefully. You okay? A breath that tried to sound casual and landed on wheeze. Actually, do you have a minute? It's so awkward. A laugh, brittle at the edges. Don't hate me for this. We had a client pull out at the last second. Payroll's due Monday, and if I can't cover it, I lose people I'll never get back. How much? The question tasted like metal. 40 would bridge it, just for a week. I'd give you a promissory note, interest, whatever you want. You know I'm good for it. You're the only person I could ask. 40. The number landed with a thud beside 29.5 million. Obscene neighbors. I saw her at Ava's 3rd birthday party, frosting on her lip, vowing our girls would take over the world. I saw her last winter, lips too red for the hour, telling me she'd finally cracked boutique retail. I heard the gap, the space where she didn't say I tried a dozen banks first. Nora, I said softly, do you want money or do you want me to say yes? Ellie, please don't. I wouldn't ask if it's humiliating. I'm not saying no. I said because I wasn't, not yet. I'm saying this is the kind of thing that kills friendships when it's done in the dark. Text me your numbers. I'll have my attorney look at terms. Your attorney? A beat too long. Of course, right, formal is good. We'll talk in the morning. When I hung up, the room felt colder. Maybe because the first request had come so quickly on the heels of Jonathan's letter. Maybe because I could hear the tiny click of a trap setting in someone else's mind. I turned back to the safe. Under the trust papers, a sealed manila envelope held photocopies of articles. Financial advisor indicted in elder exploitation scheme. Family POA abused, court intervenes. Red pen circled phrases, speed, capacity, family pressure. Jonathan had curated a museum of my future enemies. I lifted the black ledger. Inside, neat columns, small handwriting, notes that read like prayers. Ellie's guardrail fund, for the war she doesn't know about, MP. Retainer renewed through 20. The last line trailed off mid-digit, as if the pen had been pulled away by something larger than ink. I folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope, then took the business card and my phone upstairs. The kitchen brightened as I turned on the under-cabinet lights. I dialed the number with the heavy, certain feeling of a lock hearing the right key. Patel Law, a woman answered. Her voice was quick without being rushed. Good evening, I said. My name is Alina Brooks. My husband was Jonathan Brooks. There was the smallest silence, like a heartbeat listening to itself. Mrs. Brooks, she said, and I heard recognition slide into place. I'm Mara. I've been waiting for your call. Mara Patel met me at 8 a.m. Sharp, the way people arrive when they planned for your emergency 2 years ago. Her office sat on the 12th floor over the market, all glass and steel and the smell of coffee that means work gets done. She was mid-50s, no-nonsense, hair pulled back like she'd tie it tighter if the law allowed. I'm sorry for the secrecy, she said after the greetings that pass for intimacy between strangers who already trust each other. Your husband insisted. He believes surprises should be for birthdays, not bank accounts. You knew him, I said, more statement than question. I knew his intention, she replied, and I know yours the moment you called. Let's start with the basics. She slid a slim binder across the table. Irrevocable trust, Brooks family protective. Tabs like guard dogs. Bottom line, Mara said, tapping a page with a neatly manicured finger. Even if you handed Daniel Mercer a signed power of attorney, he couldn't touch a cent. The trust owns the assets. You control the trust as beneficiary and protector. It's a fortress. People like Daniel prefer unlocked doors. I felt something unknot between my ribs. So the papers he brought would give him control over everything you own outside this trust, and control over you. Her gaze was level. Access to your medical choices, the ability to move you, to isolate you, that's the playbook. He brought a notary to dinner, I said. He tried to make speed sound like safety. Urgency is the oldest trick. Mara turned another tab. Your husband funded a failsafe too. If anyone attempts to gain control by isolation or false capacity claims, we trigger an emergency instruction set: doctors, witnesses, statements already recorded. She smiled without any softness. We like receipts, I exhaled. So how do we stop playing defense? We don't, she said. We play offense politely. She slid a single sheet to me. A recorded meeting. You tell Daniel you've reconsidered, you invite him to your home, you let him talk. He will. We preserve everything. Then we hand it to the right prosecutor who understands this isn't a family squabble, it's fraud with a family costume. The right prosecutor. Mara's mouth curved. Assistant District Attorney Leela Nguyen. She eats cases like this for breakfast. She'll join us if you're willing. I'm willing, I said. I've been willing since they hid me behind flowers. Mara's assistant brought in coffee that could perform minor surgeries. While we waited for Leela, I texted Ava breakfast, tomorrow, just us. 3 dots appeared, vanished then. Can we talk tonight? It's important. The door opened and a compact woman in a navy suit entered with the momentum of a well-aimed argument. Mrs. Brooks, she said, shaking my hand. I've heard enough to be angry. Anger is useful when it's accurate. You make it sound like a tool, I said. It is, Leela said. So is a camera, so is a notary when they don't realize who they're notarizing for. We spent an hour building a plan. Hidden audio in my living room. A second camera in the mantel clock. A safety word garden that, if I said it twice, would bring officers to my door with a wellness check that no judge would question later. Leela explained how men like Daniel framed their narrative. She asked me to help. She's confused. I was doing what the family wanted. She explained how we would set fire to that script. Mara handled the part hearts hate. If he tries to isolate you, move you, speak over you, insist on confidentiality, you lean in. The more he shows us who he is, the more we thank him for the evidence. I pictured Jonathan's letter, his tidy handwriting predicting this exact weather, and felt steadier than I had in months. Let's garden. Ava called that afternoon from the parking lot of a grocery store you only visit when you're pretending you don't check prices. The first thing I heard was the windshield wipers. The second was the worry she'd tried to swallow. "Mom, can we not do the thing where you make jokes first? I'm in over my head." The tighter I wanted to hold her, the lighter my voice became. "Tell me. Dan says not to bother you, but I'm late on a card." She rushed the words out like she could outrun the shame. "Only this month or last, it's nothing. He'll transfer money, he just needs time, but the bank keeps calling in." "How late?" I asked. A silence that measured fear. 60 days, maybe 90. I walked to the window and watched the rain, the city blurring into soft disaster. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because I knew what you'd say," she snapped, then softened so fast it hurt. "'Cause I didn't want you to be right about him." "I'm not interested in being right, I'm interested in keeping you safe." "I'm fine," she said too quickly. "Dan says it's all temporary, he's just rebalancing after the wedding. He manages our money, he's good at it, he has a company." "What company?" "Mercer Strategic Holdings," she said, tasting each syllable like it might be poisonous. "He calls it a family office." "Does it have employees, a lease, a website?" "Mom, I'm not being petty, Ava, I'm being specific, there's a difference." She swallowed. "I don't know. Send me the statement that's calling you, I'll have someone look. Dan will be furious." "I've carried your fury before," I said gently. "I can carry it again." After we hung up, I forwarded the number to Mara. 10 minutes later, she called back with her voice set to clinical. "Collection desk out of a Nevada bank with a notorious pipeline to private lenders. Your son-in-law has at least 3 high-interest instruments linked to an entity called MSH Evergreen LLC. I ran the registration. And it's a shell, filed 2 months before his engagement to Ava. Mailing address is a mailbox store. Registered agent belongs to one of Graham Mercer's firms. Graham, Daniel's uncle, mentor to a generation of men who think guardianship means ownership." The room tilted. "So the company is a funnel for other people's money," she said. "I'm looping Leela. This escalates us from family concern to structured exploitation." I thought of Ava in her car with the wipers beating time, paying for lifestyle with a past due notice and a husband's promises. I thought of Victoria's diamonds under lights that made even lies look honest. My phone buzzed again. "Nora, any update? I hate to push, but the payroll clock is nuclear." I stared at the text, then typed, "Attorney reviewing. We'll do it properly or not at all." She responded with a string of praying hands and a heart that made me sadder than a curse would have. That night, I opened the mantle clock and let Mara's text slide a camera into its throat. We tested audio with jokes you tell only to wiretaps. I walked through how the afternoon would go until the living room felt like a stage, and I felt like the kind of woman who hits her mark without looking down. At 9:52 p.m., Daniel texted, "Been thinking about our talk. I can bring my notary tomorrow at 3 if that's not too soon. The sooner you're protected, the better we'll all sleep." I held the phone long enough for my pulse to write its own message. Then I typed, "Tomorrow at 3 works. I want to do the right thing for the family." A bubble appeared, disappeared, returned. "Proud of you. I'll make all the arrangements. And a leaner discretion is key. Let's keep this simple. No need to involve outsiders." I looked at the mantle clock with its hidden eye, at the binder with its teeth, at the letter with its handwriting that still steadied me. I typed, "Of course, see you at 3. I sent the text, then walked to the front door, tested the deadbolt, and unlocked it. Somewhere between fear and fury, a new feeling had bloomed, something like aim. The next day arrived with that damp heaviness Seattle knows how to conjure, air thick enough to slow your lungs, light so flat it made the city look photocopied. I set the stage early. The coffee table was polished, the manila folder Daniel had left with me placed neatly on top. The mantle clock ticked innocently, its new eye watching everything. At 2:58, the driveway filled with the purr of an imported engine. Through the blinds, I saw him climb out, crisp as a stock photo, suit pressed, hair sculpted, smile rehearsed. Behind him came a smaller car. Out stepped a man carrying a briefcase and a notary stamp, wearing the look of someone paid to ask no questions. I opened the door before Daniel could knock. "You're punctual," I said. "Business runs on punctuality," he replied, brushing past me like the house belonged to him. The notary trailed behind, polite, nearly invisible. "Let's get comfortable," Daniel said, spreading his papers like a dealer laying out a royal flush. He sat too close, his cologne filling the room like a claim of ownership. I perched opposite, hands folded, voice featherlight. "Remind me again what all this covers. My memory gets patchy, you know." His smile widened. "Of course, this is about protection. Once you sign, Ava and I will be empowered to manage your finances, medical decisions, even living arrangements. No more stress for you." "Living arrangements," I echoed. "So thoughtful." "Exactly, you deserve peace of mind. Maybe a smaller place, more managed, somewhere you won't have to worry." I let my hand tremble as I reached for the pen. "And if I change my mind later?" He hesitated only a beat. These arrangements are designed to be permanent, for your safety. Permanent like a life sentence, I murmured, letting the words hang. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Look, Eleanor, the world isn't kind to widows. There are predators everywhere. This ensures no one takes advantage of you. The irony nearly made me laugh. Instead, I lifted the pen, signed the first page with a shaky flourish, then paused deliberately. And this protects all my interests. All of them, he confirmed. Your accounts, your property, everything. Ava and I will take care of it all. Everything, I repeated softly. That's a lot of trust. His eyes gleamed. It's the smart move. I signed the second page, then glanced up. What happens if there's more money than you realize? The mask slipped. His pupils flared like a gambler catching a royal flush. More? He asked, voice tight with greed. How much more? I set the pen down just short of the final signature line. That's where things get interesting, isn't it? He leaned forward, hands pressing on the table. Eleanor, if there are accounts you haven't mentioned, investments you've kept private, now is the time to disclose them. I can make sure they're managed properly. Hidden assets can be risky. From the mantel clock came the softest click as the hidden camera captured his hunger. I let my expression shift, gentle widow to steel-spined matriarch. Daniel, I said, steady now, you've been very busy trying to cage me. Unfortunately for you, this little performance is being recorded. His face drained. What? And your notary friend, I added, nodding toward the bewildered man, is about to witness a very different kind of signing. Right on cue. The front door opened. Ada Leela Nguyen stepped in with 2 officers at her back. Badges flashed. Authority filled the room. Daniel Mercer, Leela said, her tone flat as a gavel. You are under arrest for attempted elder fraud, coercion, and conspiracy. The pen rolled from his fingers. This is entrapment, he spat. No, I said, standing tall. This is justice. Entrapment is what you tried to do to me. The officers cuffed him while he sputtered about misunderstandings and family loyalty. The notary stood frozen, eyes wide, briefcase hanging like a useless prop. As they led him toward the door, Daniel twisted to glare at me. This isn't over, Eleanor. You don't know who you're dealing with. I met his gaze, steady as stone. Oh, I know exactly who I'm dealing with, a man who mistook a widow for prey. The door slammed behind him, leaving only silence, the tick of the mantel clock and the scent of his cologne fading like a bad idea. I poured myself a glass of water, carried it to the window, and sipped. Outside, the drizzle had turned to sunlight breaking through gray. But in my gut, I knew the weather wasn't clearing. Daniel was only the first storm cell. Behind him, larger clouds were gathering, and I had no intention of staying inside. After the cuffs, the sirens, and the paperwork, my house remembered how to be quiet. The mantel clock ticked like a metronome to a song only the walls knew. Daniel's cologne still haunted the air, expensive, insistent, already vanishing. I texted Mara, it's done. Leela replied first, booking property phone extraction. Sit tight, don't engage the press. I wasn't planning to, I was planning to breathe. The doorbell tore that plan up. Ava stood on my porch with mascara pooled under her eyes and the kind of posture a woman wears when she's trying not to collapse. What did you do? She said, voice shaking. What did you do? I stepped back. Come in. She didn't sit. You humiliated him. At my wedding's afterglow. In our city, his coworkers, my friends, everyone's texting. You called the police on family. I called the police on a man who brought a notary to steal my life. That's not he was trying to help. Watch, I said and pressed play. The living room filled with Daniel's nice voice explaining permanent authority, living arrangements, protection from predators. It felt obscene, hearing it here now, with the couch still holding our old movie nights and my daughter's shoes still in the same basket they'd been tossed into since middle school. Ava flinched at her husband's vocabulary, permanent, blinked when he said move you, shut her eyes when my voice asked about more money, and his cracked like a boy seeing Santa Claus in July. When it ended, she stared at the screen as if a different answer might arrive if she waited one more second. Then she whispered, no, as if the word could push the recording back into its box. He's under pressure, from work, from his dad, he's been off. He brought a stranger into my home to witness him taking my agency, I said quietly. Off as a lamp, this is a system. She paced, palms to her face. Mom, this will destroy him. It would have destroyed me, I said. We can only afford one tragedy per family. Her shoulders shook. Anger galloped toward grief and then swerved back. Stubborn, you could have talked to us. He did, I said. He just called it help. She stared at me, my daughter, my mirror with a new frame, and for a moment I saw the baby who used to fist my sweater and the teenager who slammed a door hard enough to make the house cough. I can't, I have to, I need time. She left on a sob she tried to strangle into silence. By evening, my phone glowed like an alarm panel. A new site ran. Local executive arrested in elder fraud sting with a photo of Daniel in a Navy suit and the kind of face that begs for public doubt. Another outlet used family dispute and misunderstanding as if they were synonyms for a felony. Leela texted, "Leak didn't come from us. Likely Mercer camped to control the story. They didn't wait long to control me." Victoria arrived just after the headline, cocooned in a trench that cost more than my first car. She dismissed her driver with a flick, "Stay, don't listen." "Eliner," she said like a doctor delivering a terminal diagnosis. "Victoria," I answered like a nurse double-checking the chart. She didn't take off her coat. "We need to end this quietly. Withdraw the complaint. Tell the DA you're rethinking. We'll take care of you properly. Discretion protects everyone." "Define properly." "A family stipend. Oversight through our office will ensure you're comfortable and safe." She smiled. "No more public unpleasantness." "A gag and a leash," I said. "How generous." Her eyes cooled. "You misread the optics. Right now you look vindictive, unstable. A widow with grievances. Daniel will say he overreached because he was worried. People will understand that. No one will understand a mother destroying her daughter's husband." "You mean your son," I said, "who learned from his uncle how to monetize widows." Victoria's chin tilted a degree. "Careful." "Always," I said. She set a crisp folder on my table. I didn't touch it. "Non-disclosure, non-disparagement. A care plan. You sign, this disappears, you don't." And the narrative becomes unflattering. "Unflattering is a bad haircut," I said. "This is a crime." She let out a soft, pitying sound. "Eliner, you are not equipped for this world. You think truth floats to the top. It doesn't. Money floats. We pour it where we want the story to go." I walked her to the door. "You've poured enough. Try drinking some." She paused on the threshold, eyes raking over my small life. "This door only opens so many times," she murmured. "Choose carefully who you slam it on." "I am," I said and closed it. The next text came from a cousin who treated family like an ATM with holiday decorations. "Caleb, Ellie, hate to do this now, but I'm in the ER. They found something on my scans. I need a short-term loan, just until the disability check clears. Think of Dad, he'd want you to help me. 10 grand would save me." I stared at the message until the words rearranged themselves into something honest. 10 grand would test you. I typed, "Send me the hospital, physician's name, and the bill estimate. My attorney will pay the provider directly." 3 dots, then nothing. An hour later, Aunt Mary posted a photo of Caleb at trivia night, pint in hand, grinning under neon. I texted him the screenshot. He responded, "You're cold now." Money does that to people. I put the phone face down and laughed until I cried. Mara called close to midnight. Good news and worse news. Start with the dessert. Booking went clean, his phone's in evidence, and we served a preservation notice on MSH Evergreen's bank. And the vegetables. Title search lit up 3 LLCs tied to Victoria's real estate arm. Turns out family office is a laundromat if you place the machines far enough apart. Funds from Daniel's shell hopscotch through 2 property holding companies and land in a trust that buys distressed buildings for redevelopment. It's tidy until you hold it to the light. I sat very still. How exposed is she? Enough that she came to your house. Enough that she used the word discretion. Leela, already looped. She's bringing in the feds on the property angle. Elder fraud is state, laundering is federal, the combination is educational. I pictured Victoria in her perfect trench coat trying to stitch shut a wound she'd made herself. "What do you need from me?" Mara hesitated, and in that breath I heard the next storm cell drum its fingers on my roof. "Leela will call in the morning. They want to chase the network, not just the nephew." Zoomed? "They'll need you to make one more call," Mara said, to Victoria to offer the quiet she asked for. And then we let her show us the rest of the maze. Morning brought sunlight that looked suspicious, like a smile with too many teeth. I hadn't slept, not really. I kept hearing Daniel's voice on the recording, silky with concern, slick with theft. And behind that, Jonathan's letter, his handwriting steady as if he'd known this exact dawn was coming. At 8:15 the phone rang. "Mara, they're ready," she said. "Leela's here with the warrant team. All we need is your call." I held the receiver like a confession. "And I tell Victoria what exactly?" "That you're reconsidering," Mara said, "that you'll sign her agreement if she'll meet you. Let her believe she's winning, then let her talk." "Garden party with snakes," I murmured. "Exactly," she said. "But remember, you don't need to bite. Just let them hiss on tape." Victoria answered on the second ring, her voice crisp, restored to queenly form after last night's fracture. "Eliner." "Victoria," I said, keeping my tone just shy of weary. "I've been thinking about your offer. Perhaps you were right. Maybe discretion is best. Silence, the kind a hunter makes before tightening the snare. Then, I'm glad you've come to your senses. When can we meet?" "This afternoon, my house, 3 o'clock. "Perfect," she said. "I'll bring the documents." She hung up before gratitude could contaminate the air. At 2:45, Mara and Ada Leela hid their cars down the block. Tiny cameras blinked awake in my living room. I sat with Jonathan's pearls tight against my throat, rehearsing the role, widow chastened, ready to surrender. At 3:02, Victoria arrived, trench coat immaculate, perfume like polished ambition. She swept in as if inspecting a new acquisition. "Eleanor," she said, setting a leather folder on my coffee table. "This will settle everything." I poured tea, hands deliberately unsteady. "What exactly does everything include?" She crossed her legs, the movement precise. "The stipend, oversight, guidance. In return, you withdraw your allegations, you confirm to the press that Daniel misunderstood, and you allow Mercer Holdings to manage the trust going forward." My head tilted. "The trust? Yes." Her smile gleamed. "I know Jonathan left provisions. We don't need to quibble about amounts. What matters is efficiency. Continuity." I stirred my tea. "And Daniel, he rots in county while you sip continuity. He'll be fine once this is settled. Judges respect unity. If we present a common front, charges melt." I met her eyes. "Unity is expensive. That's why we pay." I let my silence stretch just long enough, then, "How many widows have you managed this way, Victoria?" For the first time, she blinked. "Excuse me," I leaned forward. "How many mothers-in-law, aunts, lonely cousins, how many families sign away their old women for a stipend and a leash?" She recovered quickly, but the crack was visible. "This isn't about widows. This is about protecting assets. Do you think you're the first to need help?" Daniel learned from the best. His uncle Graham has perfected these structures for decades. "Graham," I repeated, "the architect." Her lips tightened, realizing too late she'd named him. From the mantel clock came the faintest click, the sound of evidence sealing its own envelope. I sat back, smiling like a woman finally convinced. "Very well, leave the documents. I'll review them tonight." She exhaled, relief smoothing her face. "You're making the wise choice." When she left, her heels stabbing my driveway like punctuation, Mara and Leela slipped in through the back door. "You got it," Leela said, eyes sharp with triumph. Direct mention of Graham, the structure, the laundering. She practically read us the indictment. Mara picked up the folder, gloves on. "We'll process this. It's not just fraud anymore, it's organized exploitation." My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from an unknown number. "Selene here, Daniel's friend. He promised me a cut if I helped with the widows. He lied. I'm done protecting him. Call me." I looked at Mara, then Leela. "The mistress just turned state's evidence." "Perfect," Leela said. "She'll give us emails, maybe bank trails, enough to bring Graham down." I walked to the window. Outside, the city sparkled with deceptive calm. Inside, I felt Jonathan's words burning in my pocket. "Let them underestimate you. It keeps your powder dry." But this time, the powder wasn't just mine. It was an arsenal, and the war was about to widen. That night, Ava called, voice small. "Mom, Selene showed up at my apartment. She told me things about Dan, about Uncle Graham. I don't know what's real anymore." "All of it," I said. Silence, then a broken whisper. "What do we do?" I closed my eyes, hearing the mantel clock tick, hearing the storm build. "We prepare," I told her, "because the Mercers just showed us their playbook. And now, darling, it's our turn." The courthouse smelled like old paper and boiled coffee, the scent of decisions that outlived the people who made them. I sat behind the rail in a navy suit that fit like a commandment, Jonathan's pearls cool against my throat. Leela slid into the seat beside me, a stack of exhibits under her arm, and focus bright enough to cut glass. Across the aisle, Daniel looked smaller in county khaki than he had in his wedding suit, like a child who'd borrowed a man's mistakes and couldn't return them. His lawyer had television hair and an expression that promised to make this terrible inconvenience disappear. "State calls Eleanor Brooks," the clerk intoned. I walked to the stand, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth, the easy part. Leela brought me gently through the architecture of the last 2 weeks. The dinner with the folder, the notary at my door, the language of protection that was a lock with a ribbon on it. She played excerpts of the recording. The room went very still when Daniel said permanent and living arrangements. On cross, television hair smiled like a man about to sell me a cheaper cable bundle. "Mrs. Brooks, you don't like my client, do you?" "I don't like theft dressed as kindness," I said. "You invited him over. You signed 2 pages before the police rushed in." "People sign many things under pressure," I said. "The point is who applied it." He changed lanes. "Isn't it true, Mrs. Brooks, that you are wealthy and that you have a history of paranoia about people's intentions?" Something hot flared in my chest and cooled into precision. "I am solvent, counselor. The paranoia belongs to men who see a widow and smell blood." He asked if I'd enticed Daniel by mentioning hidden accounts. Leela rose. Asked and answered. "Counsel knows the statute. Predisposition is the issue, not opportunity." Judge Hargrove peered over his glasses. Sustained. We broke for lunch after the notary testified, hands shaking, voice thin, that he'd been told this was routine family business. In the hallway, Ava waited, arms folded tight around herself like an argument she couldn't stop having. "Mom," she said, and chewed the word before letting it out. I filed. I searched her face for regret and found only exhaustion. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm not," she whispered. "Not anymore. He lied to me so beautifully." Her mouth twisted. "Selene sent me the emails." "Good," I said. Beauty is easier to prosecute when it writes things down. Back in the courtroom, Leila called Selene. She wore a blouse the color of apology and kept her eyes on the microphone. "He told me if I helped him, there'd be money for both of us," she said. "He called them guardianship conversions. He said widows were better than annuities." The words dropped like stones into a well. The jury flinched, then wrote faster. Then came the spreadsheets. Blessed be their columns, transfers from MSH Evergreen to 2 property LLCs, then to a trust controlled by a Mercer entity. Leila traced each hop with a fingertip. "And who controls those entities?" she asked the forensic accountant. "Graham Mercer," he said, through a series of layered managers designed to obscure control. Television Hair objected to the phrase designed. Judge Hargrove allowed result. The jury didn't need the adjective. The picture already had a frame. Daniel chose to testify. It was either pride or the delusion that had always protected him. He spoke to the jury as if they were investors at a luncheon. "I panicked," he said, eyes shining. "I love my wife. I love her mother. I wanted to make sure no one took advantage of her. She's been confused since her husband died." I looked straight ahead and counted the seconds between his breaths. The longer he talked, the more my fear shrank down to something small enough to hold. On cross, Leila drew him into the open field. "You brought a notary to a private dinner because you were concerned." "Yes, to make things simple for her." "You asked for permanent control because you were worried." "Yes, for safety." "You suggested changing her living arrangements because safety often requires isolation." He blinked. "I never said isolation." "No," Leila said softly. "You implied it." A murmur moved across the gallery like wind passing over wheat. The judge rapped his gavel once. The room settled. Closing arguments were a study in contrast. Television Hair asked for grace, for the assumption that family means well even when it stumbles. Leila asked for memory. The tape, the papers, the bank trail, the pattern with other women whose names Selene brought like ghosts into the room. The jury was out 49 minutes, long enough to pretend they considered an alternative. When they filed back, I watched their faces and knew before the foreperson spoke. "Guilty," he said, on all counts. Daniel made a sound I'd only ever heard from injured animals. Ava's fingers found my wrist and squeezed until my bones spoke to one another. The judge denied bond pending sentencing. Leila let out the kind of breath lawyers allow themselves twice a year. We stepped into the corridor as if the air had changed its mind about us. Reporters lifted microphones. Leila shook her head. "No comments," she said, which only made the microphones lean closer. Then a different wind blew down the hall. Men and women in navy with letters on their jackets that make bad people learn geography. FBI. They moved like a sentence with no commas. "Mrs. Brooks," a woman asked, badge bright. "We'll be brief. Based on today's testimony, a federal magistrate has issued warrants regarding Mercer Properties Northwest and related entities. Is Victoria Mercer in the building?" "She is," I said. "She never misses a performance when she can direct it." They found her before the elevator doors closed. The click of handcuffs is a small sound. It does enormous work. As they led Victoria past us, she held my gaze with a look that belonged in colder rooms. "Enjoy your moment," she said softly. The words meant only for me. "You still haven't met the person who taught Graham." I felt something shift behind my heart, the way a house settles before a storm. "There's always a teacher," I said. She smiled, small and real. "And a headmaster." That night, the city glittered like nothing terrible had ever happened to it. I poured tea and stood at the window trying to teach my body how to be still. The mantel clock ticked. My phone vibrated on the counter and crawled a little toward the edge. Unknown number, a text. "You're rearranging furniture on a ship you don't know you're on. We should talk." GM. I stared at the initials until meaning clicked into place. Before I could answer, a second message arrived from the blocked number that had warned me before any of this began. "Do not meet him alone. They don't ask, they take. A friend." The message from GM sat on my phone all night, glowing like a coal in the dark. Graham Mercer. The man Victoria had slipped into conversation as if it were nothing, as if she hadn't just drawn a map to the architect of the entire fraud machine. "You still haven't met the person who taught Graham," she'd warned, but it was Graham himself who decided to introduce the next act. At dawn, the city outside my window looked washed but not clean. I brewed coffee strong enough to cauterize nerves and called Mara. He reached out, I said. Already, her voice was sharp with both worry and expectation. What did he say? That I don't know the ship I'm on, that we should talk. Signed it GM. Silence hummed over the line. He's baiting you, trying to feel out how much you know. And how much do I know? That he launders money through real estate shells, that Daniel was his student, that Victoria's arrest cracked the facade. Mara exhaled. But you don't know the depth. No one does yet, that's what scares them. Before I could reply, another call buzzed in. Ava, I switched lines. Mom, she said, her voice raw. Uncle Graham called me. He said you're making enemies you can't handle. He wants to meet with me. My stomach went cold. Absolutely not. He sounded calm, like he was disappointed, like this was a misunderstanding that I could fix if I just listened. That's the script, I said. Disappointment is how predators pull you closer. But what if he's right? What if you've dragged us into something bigger than family drama? I closed my eyes, swallowing the old ache of my daughter choosing their story over mine. Ava, listen to me carefully. Graham doesn't want to clear things up. He wants to recruit you. If you meet him, you won't walk away clean. Her silence lasted too long. I have to think, she whispered, then hung up. By mid-morning, the house felt crowded with ghosts. Jonathan's steady voice, Daniel's hungry one, Victoria's warning, and now Graham's shadow. The doorbell broke the wait. It wasn't Mara or Leela or the FBI, it was Nora. She looked frayed, her designer scarf twisted wrong, makeup cracked at the edges. Ellie, she said, eyes darting past me into the hall. I need you, please. I let her in out of habit, then regretted it instantly. She paced the living room, arms wrapped around herself. The boutique's gone, creditors circling, and God, I got in deeper than I should have. I thought I could fix it before anyone knew. My jaw tightened. How deep? She sank onto the couch, hands shaking. One of the loans, it's tied to Mercer Holdings. I didn't know at first. They bought the debt, Ellie. They own me now. It hit like a sucker punch. You're telling me you're entangled with Graham. Her eyes filled. They promised forgiveness if I convinced you to, she broke off, covering her mouth. Convinced me to what? To stop cooperating, to sign Victoria's papers, to make this all go away. Betrayal has a taste, bitter metal, old grief. I had expected it from Victoria, from Daniel, not from the friend who used to braid my daughter's hair at sleepovers. You came here hoping I'd still trust you, I said softly. I came here because I don't want to do it, because I owe them, but I can't hurt you. She clutched my hand. Please, tell me what to do. Before I could answer, my phone buzzed on the table. Another text. Unknown number again. Your friend can't save you, she's collateral. Meet me tomorrow at Mercer Tower, 10 a.m. Come alone. GM, I turned the screen toward Nora, her face crumpled. Oh God, they'll ruin me. I pulled my hand back. They already did. That night, I called Mara and Leela to the house. We sat in my kitchen, papers spread like battle plans. Nora hovered at the edge of the room, guilty and terrified. They're escalating, Leela said. First Daniel, then Victoria. Graham knows he's exposed. Now he wants to control the narrative by controlling you. Or my daughter, I said quietly. He's already reached out to Ava. Mara leaned forward. We let him think he's succeeding. You agree to the meeting. We wire you again. And this time, we don't just catch a predator, we drag the headmaster into daylight. I nodded, though every cell in my body recoiled. And Ava, she'll be safer once Graham's in custody, Leela said. But you need to prepare her. He'll try to turn her heart against you first. As they packed up, I stayed at the table, Jonathan's letter spread in front of me. Let them underestimate you. It keeps your powder dry. The powder was dry. The fuse was lit. And tomorrow, I would walk into Mercer Tower with a smile, a wire, and the memory of every woman they thought would fold. Just before midnight, another text arrived. Same blocked number as before, the ally in the shadows. Don't let them stage the meeting on their turf. Mercer Tower is a trap. I'll send you the safer place, trust me. A friend, 2 invitations. One from Graham, one from a ghost, both dangerous. And I had until morning to decide which wolf's den to enter. At 7 a.m., the city looked like it had been rinsed and set back on the shelf. I made coffee that could peel paint and stood at the sink rereading the 2 invitations on my phone, Graham's, Mercer Tower. 10 a.m. alone, and the anonymous warning, don't go. I'll send a safer place. Trust me. A friend, trust is a muscle. If you never use it, it atrophies. If you use it wrong, it tears. Mara arrived in slacks that didn't wrinkle and a jaw that did. Leela followed with a canvas case that made soft, purposeful sounds when she set it down. You're not stepping into Mercer Tower, Leela said, already inventorying wires like a jeweler. Private security, cameras we can't control, exits we can't cover. If he wants to stage a scene and paint you unstable, that's the exact room he'd rent. He told Ava the same thing, I said. Meet me, fix your mother. Mara's mouth tightened. Of course he did. Every empire has a door marked family only, that's where the trap always is. Then we choose a different door, Leela said. Somewhere public covered ours. My phone buzzed. New message from the same block number, Olympic Sculpture Park, Glass Pavilion, 10 a.m. city cameras. No Mercer cameras. Watch for the man in the red windbreaker, he's yours, not theirs. A friend. Leela read it over my shoulder. Either a lifeline, she said, or bait with manners. We go either way, Mara said, but we go on our terms. At 9:42, the Glass Pavilion looked like its name, sunlight walled into obedience. Tourists drifted in twos, pretending to argue about art. Runners ghosted through on quiet shoes. A man in a red windbreaker checked his watch and not the people. He nodded once when Leela's unmarked Taurus stopped at the loading zone. Our nod back contained a whole grammar. They wired me under my cardigan. The mic lived where pearls met clavicle. The transmitter sat against my spine and hummed like a secret. Leela walked me through the tree line, murmuring coverage zones like a coach diagramming a play. Bench with the stainless plaque is your safe word. If you sit, I move. If you stand and say garden twice, I move fast. You always were good with rules, I said, more to steady my breath than to praise her. Rules are how we out stubborn men who think they are inevitable, she said, and smiled like the sun had just remembered my name. Graham arrived at 9:58, long coat, gray hair that had spent a lot of money to look like it didn't care, the kind of gait men learn when rooms have always opened for them. He didn't bring bodyguards. He brought confidence, which is heavier. A leaner, he said, extending a hand. His palm was warm, dry, practiced. Thank you for choosing neutral ground. I always disliked glass towers for serious conversations, too many reflections. Reflections are honest. I said, they show you what you've been avoiding. He laughed gently as if I'd charmed him. Smart, Daniel said you were. Daniel says many things, I said, some of them crimes. He sat, I sat. In my left ear, Leela's breath steadied like a metronome. Graham folded his hands. I'll be direct. You've stepped into currents you don't understand, and you've mistaken floodwater for garden hose. You've hurt my nephew, you've embarrassed my sister-in-law. You've impressed some very bored prosecutors. That's all survivable. What isn't survivable is trying to make a precedent out of it. A precedent, I repeated. For what? Not robbing widows. For criminalizing stewardship, he said mildly. Families like ours guide capital away from chaos. That requires firmness. His eyes were the calm blue of winter lakes, beautiful and fatal. You can either become a public ornament for a cause that will chew you up and forget your name, or you can accept what you've been offered and live out your years with dignity and comfort. You mean a stipend and a leash, I said. Your favorite jewelry. He smiled at the water as if it had told a joke. You talk like a crusader, but crusades run on fuel and yours is finite. Wrong, I said, more gently than I felt. My fuel compounds. Jonathan's trust, he said, and the world narrowed to the sound of my own blood. You think we didn't know, you think he hid it from everyone. How would you? Because I taught him how to hide it, Graham said. He let the words sit between us like a bomb he'd placed years ago. Back when we still agreed on what needed protecting. The wind shifted. The microphone kissed my skin colder. He came to me the year after Ava was born, Graham continued, conversational as weather. He wanted to learn how the smart money disappears. I told him, not disappear, transform. Put it in a vehicle that answers to the law you choose, not the one that comes knocking. I gave him names. He was a good student until he grew sentimental. Sentimental, I said, about his wife keeping her life. About believing he could keep her and his ideals, Graham said, almost fond. Jonathan wanted the fortress without the keep. He didn't want the part where someone makes the hard calls. You can't lock a door and then complain when there's no fresh air. You call that stewardship, I said. I call it theft with Latin. He shrugged. Language is jurisdiction. Something moved at the edge of my vision, red windbreaker shifting 3 inches, a gull lowering to the rail, Leela's attention sharpening across the path. Graham's voice gentled. Eleanor, I liked your husband. I like your mind. I'm offering you an exit. Withdraw your complaint, admit to confusion and stress. Let us place you somewhere comfortable with staff who know their job and you can live a long, quiet life. In exchange, your daughter keeps her home. Your friend Nora gets her debts resolved. Your cousin Caleb stops pretending to be sick for money because he'll be too busy not going to jail for fraud. I can solve things, it's what I do. By moving levers other people can't see, I said. By pulling the levers that keep everything from falling, he corrected. Who pulls yours? I asked. He smiled properly for the first time. There it is, he said. The interesting question. A cyclist clacked by. Somewhere a child protested a stroller. The city went on pretending it wasn't listening. You think I'm the end of a sentence, he said. I'm a comma. Then who wrote the clause? I asked. He tilted his head toward the skyline, toward the bank logo that had gleamed on the city longer than my marriage. Men who don't sign their names to what they own. Men who know control is better than possession. Men who taught me when I was young and ambitious and under the illusion that money was the point. It isn't. Money is simply the polite way power keeps score. Give me a name, I said. He shook his head with something like pity. No, you don't get to meet the headmaster because you corrected a nephew and handcuffed a widowmaker. You'll never meet him. You'll only feel him when doors don't open and phones don't answer. Then I'll build my own doors, I said. That's adorable, he said, not unkindly, and exhausting. He slid a thin folder toward me. I didn't touch it. Stipend contract, care plan, non-disclosure, you sign, the heat reduces, I make calls. The ostensible narrative becomes a family misunderstanding resolved in private. The unspoken narrative becomes Alina Brooks was wise enough to accept gravity. And if I don't sign? I asked. He looked past me at something only he could see. Then in 3 months, a court will hold a hearing about your capacity because someone will file that you've begun making dangerous choices. A sympathetic doctor will testify that grief has made you impulsive. The papers you refuse to sign will be signed by a judge who thinks he's saving you from yourself. Then the leash and the cage arrive anyway, they just bruise more on the way in. Your confidence is almost impressive, I said. It's like listening to a weather forecast that thinks it's God. He leaned in a fraction. It's not confidence, Alina, it's history. I folded my hands in my lap to keep them from shaking, whether with anger or fear I couldn't tell. And if history changes? History doesn't change, he said. People do, they get tired. I stood slowly. He stood with me, polite to the end. The mic at my throat felt hot now, like a fever deciding something. Do you know the thing I've learned since Jonathan died? I asked. That grief turns smart people into martyrs, he offered. That the only thing you have to be more stubborn than is the thing that wants you to sit down, I said. I'm not tired. I turned toward the bench with the stainless plaque. Sat. Felt the air shift as Leela rose somewhere and the red windbreaker pivoted like a compass needle finding north. Mr. Mercer, Leela's voice arrived before her body did, crisp, official, federal at the edges. I'm Ada Nguyen, stand up please. Graham didn't blink. He smiled, slow and elegant, and placed his hands behind his back as if stretching. Always a pleasure to meet public service, he said. Am I detained? For questioning, Leela said. Federal agents will have additional questions about wires, properties, and the companies that don't exist until they do. He turned his face to me as 2 agents materialized and the red windbreaker became a badge I hadn't yet seen. Alina, he said softly, you traded a comfortable ending for a heroic middle. Middles are messy. So are empires when they fall, I said. They walked him toward the path. He didn't struggle. Men like Graham only struggle in rooms they control. As the agents cleared the corner, my phone buzzed. Unknown. The message was a single line. Behind you, don't turn, 2 minutes. A friend, every nerve in my body wanted to whirl. Instead, I watched a gull bully a smaller gull and folded my hands tighter. Leela's voice ticked in my ear, stay seated. A woman's voice, low, steady, familiar enough to make a door in my head tremble, came from just behind my shoulder. You can breathe, she said. He'll spend the next 48 hours praying we don't find the ledger, we will. Who are you? I asked, still watching the gulls. A mistake Graham made 20 years ago, she said quietly, and your wedding planner. The breath left me like a laugh getting lost. Sophie, I whispered. Keep your face forward, she murmured. Your mic is live. I'm the one who texted you at the reception. I saw him corner you by the centerpieces. I've been feeding Leela for months. I used to feed Graham. My mouth went dry. Why? Because he turned me into a tool when I was 23 and thought I was working my way up. Because I watched what he did to women like you, and then I watched what he did to women like me, because someone had to decorate the cage. I got tired of ironing the ribbon. Why didn't you come to me? I said. I did, she said. Anonymously first, then as a vendor who asked you to stand near the mirror, not the aisle. You listened in all the ways that mattered. Footsteps approached. Sophie's voice thinned. I can't be seen with you, but there's a name you need. Hawthorne, not a company, a person. He's the seminar Graham never stops attending. Hawthorne what? I said. But she was gone, footfalls drowned under a stroller squeak and a runner's cough. Leela slid onto the bench a moment later, eyes scanning, posture telling 3 different stories to 3 different cameras. Good work, she said. We have him on offer on threat on structure. On record, federal smiling. Sophie, I said. What? Our wedding planner, she's the ghost, she just gave me a name. I swallowed. Hawthorne, Leela's gaze hardened like cooling steel. That's not a name we say near microphones. We'll go dark to say it again. My phone buzzed once more. A text from Ava, frantic. Mom, I messed up. I thought I could make it stop. I went to meet Graham at the tower. They said he'd been delayed, but his associate would see me. I'm in a conference room and my phone is dying. 21st floor. Door won't open, please. Ava's text froze me where I sat, pearls pressing into my throat like a verdict. Conference room. 21st floor, door won't open. My daughter was locked in Graham's glass kingdom while his wrists were cooling in federal steel. I shoved the phone toward Leela. She read it once, her lips tightening into a line that meant someone was about to be scared professionally. They're already moving pieces without him, she said. Associates, maybe Hawthorne. Mara arrived at the pavilion in a blur, heels clicking like gavel strikes. We just caught Graham, she said, and you're telling me they still managed to get Ava upstairs? Yes, I said, my voice cracking but low. She went because she still thought she could fix it, because she thought family could be untangled like jewelry chains. Leela dialed furiously. SWAT, U.S. Marshals, seal the building. 21st floor conference level. No one in, no one out. My phone buzzed again. Ava. A photo this time, her reflection in a wall of glass, pale, frightened, behind her a man in a tailored suit who looked at the camera with a smile you only learn in rooms without windows. Caption, he says he's Hawthorne. Mercer Tower loomed above us like arrogance cast in steel. Its windows caught the gray sky and bent it into knives. The plaza was already crawling with agents by the time Leela and I arrived. Yellow tape sliced across the entrance. News vans hovered like vultures smelling ink. Inside, the elevators were locked down. Tactical teams swarmed the stairwells, shields glinting. Mara barked into her phone about injunctions and emergency warrants. I stood in the lobby, my hands numb, replaying Jonathan's letter in my mind. They will come wearing family and good intentions. He hadn't warned me about men who came wearing nothing but certainty. An agent in matte black approached. Ma'am, you need to wait here. My daughter is upstairs. Yes, ma'am, that's why you wait here. But waiting is what widows are supposed to do, and I was done being what widows are supposed to be. On the 21st floor, the conference wing was a hallway of glass and silence. Ava sat at the table, phone dead in her hands, while Hawthorne leaned against the far wall, arms crossed like a headmaster disappointed in his class. He was mid-50s, elegant, his gray suit the kind that whispered old money and older discipline. You look just like your father, he told her. He thought stubbornness was a shield too. Ava's breath hitched. You knew him, he studied with me, just like Graham. Just like half the men who build fortunes you think fell from the sky. Your mother has painted me a monster, but really I'm an instructor. I teach families how not to collapse under their own incompetence. You locked me in, she whispered. He smiled. Sometimes a locked room is just a classroom. In the lobby, Leela's radio crackled. Visual on the target. Female inside. One male suspect. No sign of weapons yet. Mara whispered to me, if he's Hawthorne, he won't use guns, he uses contracts. He'll talk her into signing something before we reach the door. My chest constricted. Then we don't have time. I grabbed the nearest agent's vest. Patch me in, let me talk to her. He hesitated. Leela nodded once. Do it. They handed me a headset linked to the room's intercom. Static, then my own voice filling the chamber above us. Ava, she jerked, eyes darting to the ceiling. Mom, yes darling, I'm here, you're not alone. Hawthorne's smile deepened. Of course she's here, she never misses her own battles. Ava, I said, forcing calm, he'll ask you to sign. He'll say it's for protection, that's how he cages people. He already said, she whispered. Don't touch the pen, I commanded. Not one line, do you hear me? Hawthorne tilted his head at the speaker. Eleanor, you've made an enemy you don't comprehend. This is bigger than a trust fund. Bigger than a daughter who mistakes loyalty for independence. I comprehend predators, I said, and I comprehend when they start to sweat. A crash thundered through the feed, agents breaching the hall. Hawthorne didn't flinch. He stepped closer to Ava, palms open, voice low. If you walk out with them, your mother wins a skirmish. If you walk out with me, you inherit an empire. Which lesson do you want to learn? Ava stared at the pen, her hand twitched. Garden, I said into the mic, the code word. Garden, the door exploded inward. Agents flooded in, weapons raised. Ava screamed, the pen clattering to the floor. Hawthorne raised his hands slowly, serenity carved into his face like marble. You think this ends me, he said as they cuffed him. I taught Graham, I taught Jonathan, and I've taught dozens more. Cut off one branch. The tree still grows. He looked straight into the camera, into me. You're pruning shadows, Eleanor. The roots are underground. In the stairwell, Ava collapsed against me, sobbing. I almost signed. I thought he knew Dad. I thought he could tell me something true. I held her tighter than I'd ever held anything. The only truth he knows is how to steal someone else's. But in my pocket, Jonathan's letter weighed heavy, its lines about people who would come wearing family and good intentions. What he hadn't told me, what Hawthorne had just proven, was that Jonathan himself had once stood in that classroom. And suddenly, I wasn't sure how much of my husband's fortress was built to protect me or to atone. That night in my kitchen, the safe lay open again. Bank ledgers, trust papers, Jonathan's notes. And one folder I hadn't noticed before, thin, stamped with a single word in his handwriting, Hawthorne. I reached for it with hands that shook, knowing it would tell me not just about Graham's teacher, but about Jonathan's secret apprenticeship. The folder opened with a sigh of dust and betrayal. Inside was a single sheet of paper. If he comes back, don't fight him alone. The page fluttered in my hands as the mantel clock ticked louder than it ever had, because Hawthorne wasn't gone. He was already planted too deep, and I had just made myself visible to all his roots. The folder lay open on the kitchen table, Jonathan's words staring at me like an accusation. If he comes back, don't fight him alone. He knew. My husband, my steady, gentle Jonathan, had known Hawthorne wasn't just a man but a system, and he'd left me one sentence instead of a map. Ava sat across from me, pale, her hands trembling around a mug she hadn't touched. "Mom," she whispered, "what if Dad was part of it? If all this money, what if the fortress he built was just Hawthorne's blueprint?" I looked at her, at the daughter who'd inherited Jonathan's eyes and my stubbornness. "Then the fortress has a flaw," I said softly. "But we'll use it against them. That's what we do with flaws, we turn them into exits." Before she could answer, my phone buzzed. Not Mara, not Leela. Unknown number again. "The root system stretches further than you think. Tonight, Mercer Tower is only the beginning. Watch the news at midnight." A friend. At 11:58, Ava and I sat in the dark living room, the television glowing like a secret about to confess. The anchor's voice cut through static. "Breaking tonight. Simultaneous raids are underway across 3 states targeting alleged elder exploitation networks linked to Mercer Holdings and affiliates. Federal agents are calling it the largest coordinated action in recent history. Sources confirm multiple sealed indictments, including senior executives in banking, healthcare, and real estate." Ava's mouth fell open. "It's bigger than Graham." "Of course it is," I murmured. "He was just a lieutenant with better suits." The anchor continued, eyes grave. One name repeatedly mentioned, Hawthorne. "Investigators believe he may be the architect behind decades of financial exploitation targeting widows and retirees. Current whereabouts remain unknown." Unknown, which meant the man who'd smiled at Ava across a glass table was already beyond their reach. At 2 a.m., Mara called. "We pulled half the tree out tonight, but the roots are holding. Judges are compromised. Accounts lead to shell foundations older than most of us, and Eleanor Hawthorne slipped custody." My breath caught. "What do you mean slipped?" "He never hit central booking. A transfer vehicle was diverted. By the time they realized, it was empty." Ava pressed her hand to her mouth, eyes wide. "He's out." "Yes," Mara said grimly. "And if his text to you was real, he wanted you to know it." By dawn, my house was no longer mine. Agents checked locks, cameras blinked in corners, phones were swapped for secure lines. Leela came in with files under her arm and exhaustion in her eyes. "He'll come at you differently now," she said. "Not contracts, not stipends. He'll come with stories, with people you trust." She laid a photo on the table, a man in uniform smiling at a ribbon cutting 20 years ago. Jonathan, younger, standing beside him, and between them, unmistakable Hawthorne. The same calm lake blue eyes, the same winter smile. Ava gasped. "Dad knew him. Dad studied with him," I corrected, my throat ached. "And then Dad tried to break free. That's why he built the trust in secret. That's why he hid it even from me." Leela tapped the photo. "Hawthorne doesn't forgive apostasy. Jonathan leaving him was betrayal, protecting you was rebellion. That's why Hawthorne wants you now, because Jonathan's fortress still works, wants it dismantled." That night, I dreamed of Jonathan's voice, "Don't fight him alone." But when I woke, the house wasn't empty. On the counter where no one had left it sat a single white envelope. No forced entry, no camera triggered. Just the envelope, heavy with intent. Inside, a photo of Ava sleeping in her bed, time-stamped 1 hour earlier. And beneath it, a note in that same precise hand I'd seen at the tower. "You can't keep her safe behind glass. Sooner or later, roots find their way inside. Let's negotiate before you lose more than money." The mantel clock ticked louder, marking each second Ava was still under this roof. For the first time since this war began, I felt truly out of time.